We have one final talk from Keith Mitchell, currently DNS-OARC Secretary, and with many, many other roles in DNS over the last 40 years. Although this is apparently not where he planned to be starting out, it was more of a kind of accident. And he's going to explain to us why DNS is still important and not to be ignored even today, because it's certainly not ignoring you. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Kathy and the PC, for a great program over the past couple of days. So, I'm Keith Mitchell. I only help out a little bit at OARC these days, but I suspect many of you know who I am. It occurred to me that I've been doing this for a while, and that there might be some value in sharing some of my long experiences of working in the DNS, or at least trying to avoid working in the DNS and failing. Welcome to Scotland. This is a city that I grew up in and did much of my education in, all within a kilometre of here. Also, we had the last right meeting in Edinburgh and 2 UK-NOF meetings. Indeed, it was in this very space that a UK-NOF meeting, 2 of my fellow Scots, Jim Reid and Neil McRae, got into a heated discussion of DNSSEC, and with a room full of ISPs, I eventually realised I was the only person that could understand the entire conversation. But yeah, actually it is a very literate and articulate, excuse me, it's a very literate and articulate city. I mean, the Scottish Enlightenment grew up here. There's many ideas, thinkers, science, engineering, and literature. You know, we have a science university, and then we have some engineering universities. I know a lot of you have been exploring. Please do continue to explore if you're staying for the right meeting or longer. So, I never really set out to be a DNS operator, but it keeps coming back to me. I never quite failed to escape it. So this is kind of like a career story of how I started out as an apprentice implementer, how I finished up doing sysadmin, network engineer, founding an internet exchange and a ccTLD, being involved in root operations, building the OARC and other communities, and hopefully being a vaguely useful retiree. Also, I'm not wearing an OARC hat for this presentation. This is purely in a personal capacity. So, 4 decades. Even in 1985, I was using some of the foundational technologies of the internet, TCP/IP, Unix, even DNS. As I became less useful as an engineer, I pivoted more to non-profit governance and management in this space, mostly small organizations and non-profits. My career has also been split almost exactly in the middle between time in Europe and time in the US. There's more details if you really want to hear the whole story. I'm proud to have done computer science degrees from what I think are 2 of the best universities in the UK. In terms of institutions, I've helped found 2 that have become institutions in the UK and various other organizations that didn't quite last as long. I've been involved in OARC in various capacities for nearly 20 years, also RIPE NCC and ISC. I'm still trying to be useful. With the help of my Jurassic friend here, some DNS prehistory. I think we all know that humans prefer names, not numbers, for the computers, and that was true even in the early 80s. Back then, it was done with static tables held in each end system. Even when I was an undergrad, there was a wide area intercampus network between 3 of Central Scotland's universities, and I mean, the protocols were built from the scratch up. That eventually evolved into X25 networks, which became part of the Joint Academic Network. The UK National Academic Network, in the absence of any applications, came up with its own set of applications, and they include something called the Name Registration Scheme, which used something that looked a lot like domain names. And any of you that have done DNS 101 training will, of course, be familiar with the history of the ARPANET hosts.txt file. So, back in 1985, I think I would like to give a lot of credit to somebody without whom I think the UK internet would not exist in the form that it does, and that is Peter Kirstein. I was professor of computer science at University College London, and he was doing internetworking research even before TCP/IP was born. They actually had some Unix systems which had a directory full of RFCs, and I think that was the only place in the country you could do that. So I was picking away at them, and this domain name system sounded like an interesting topic to do a student seminar on. Little did I suspect. So, actually, in the late 1980s, it was a mess. Really, the only place that you would see anything resembling a domain name was an email. There were IP networks, but they were not necessarily connected to each other or to the internet. There was a bunch of email technologies. In addition to SMTP, there was UUCP, which was mostly over dial-up. There was Greybook, which was over X25 in the UK and various other countries. There was a whole X400 thing. IBM had BitNet. There was CSNet in North America. Europe, there's a thing called EAN. And it was a mess. Literally, I was getting email to people by entering email addresses that looked something like that. And for some reason, I found this an interesting challenge. Don't ask me why. I really, really still hate SendMail. And then there was the Indian Wars. The UK people decided that they would start their domain names with the country code, and TCP/IP World decided that they would end their domain names with the country code. And then, of course, when you got computer science in Czechoslovakia, it even became hard to separate the two out. So again, within a kilometre of here, down in the Grass Market, when Harriet Watt was there, one of their guys actually came up with the M4 macro package from hell in order to get SendMail to beat all this mess into some kind of sense. After a year of almost being connected to the internet at UCL, I came back to Edinburgh and I worked for this startup called Spider Systems. And what they were doing was selling TCP/IP solutions as enterprise solutions. They were interoperable, they worked well. You didn't need to connect them to the internet to get value out of them. And one of the first products I worked on was something called the Spider Port, which had 10 serial lines on it. Resources were a little bit like a PC, but without any spinning media or screen or anything like that. And you did not want to configure a host table in one of these. The DNS looked like a great idea. As the new guy, I was given the project of renting a stub resolver. I'm very glad that code is buried on a quick tape cartridge and that none of you can actually see it and point and laugh at it. But there weren't many implementations out there, and it just so happened that Bind 4 had come out around that time, so we got a half-inch tape from my alma mater, and that's what I tested my code against. It may be the most useful and used C code I ever wrote. Spider was successful. It grew to 7 sites, and we had a bunch of busy developers who kept testing things that kept taking down the production network, and wouldn't it be good if we had someone to manage this? And I thought that would be interesting, because the idea of network engineer as a profession didn't really exist back then. Neither did any management tools, unless you were prepared to pay tens of thousands of pounds for a proprietary management station. So actually, just keeping track of the zone files and change control was one of the ways that I kept track of what the hell was on the network. It was quite useful. And a lot of things broke. There was a lot of stuff that didn't interoperate back there. There was a lot of layer 2 bridge instability. The DNS was not one of the things that broke. It was part of the solution, not part of the problem. So by the time I left Spider, that's the kind of size of zone that we were running internally. But this was all standalone. The only way out was dial-up or X25. There was no commercial UK internet to connect it to. So after a bit of lobbying with some other people who wanted to see UK internet, we decided let's just do it. And we set up Pipex, which was the UK's first internet startup and the first commercial ISP. And finally, I could delegate my zones. I could be part of the internet. I could send email to Joyce Reynolds and get IP address space. And again, it all just worked. Actually, most of it just worked. We still had to interoperate with the UUCP world and all the other weird internet email protocols that were going on. But fortunately, University of Cambridge had come up with something called PP, which was a message transfer agent, which was a lot better than SendMail. But the number of people that could actually configure this stuff and run 3 or 4 different email protocols, you could count on the fingers of one hand. So we kind of fought over them. Eventually, I co-authored the UK's first peering agreement with Peter Holder at University of Canterbury. And that wasn't just about exchanging IP traffic, that was actually about how do we keep these various namespaces in step with each other. And I mean, literally, we were faxing paper forms backwards and forwards. It was still a mess. The only PyPX zone copy I could find was fairly early on, so it was quite small, but you know, PyPX, it was even before the web came along, PyPX grew very quickly. We got involved in 1994 in setting up the London Internet Exchange. That was also very successful. And around then, I thought, well, okay, let's do something new again. Let's be the world's first employee of an internet exchange anywhere. But I got dragged into other things as well. You know, the non-DNS stuff was starting to fade by the mid-90s. Yeah, there was some interim measures about managing the UK namespace, which were based on some very strange ideas, and I managed to avoid most of that. Eventually, Nominet was created. You know, it's great to see so many Nominet people here to take over running UK on an independent, non-commercial basis, and I got dragged into that at the last minute because somebody blotted their copybook as one of the founders. So Nominet was most of the interesting the hard problems at Nominet were not actually running the DNS infrastructure. Again, it mostly just worked, apart from one or two interesting incidents. You know, the challenges were all around all the usual registry things: governance, legal aspects, commercialization, pricing, dealing with the implications of the secondary market, dealing with public policy, which was increasingly focused on the internet back then, and just doing the boring stuff of regular business operations, which so many technical geniuses are maybe not quite as strong at. So we actually got a lot of things right, some by accident, some by thinking carefully, making sure that the registry was not liable for disputes about domain names and that we had copyright in the registry were really important. And yeah, I think we built a lot of stuff. It's great to see what Nominet is today. But we made some mistakes as well. We had this idea that if you made the voting rights proportional to the number of domains, then the registrars would be accountable to the end users in some way, which of course completely underestimated the whole secondary market. I think that contributed to the capture crisis that Nominet had a few years ago, but it's good to see that it bounced back from that. Also, one of the things that didn't make our life complicated in the late 90s was DNSSEC. So that's not something that we had to deal with. So, around 1997, the root started to expand, make it less US-centric. The idea was that 13 root servers instances would be created on top of the existing, mostly US-based ones. After some maneuvering, it was decided that kroot would be operated by the RIPE NCC, but the first instance would be hosted at Links. And we got that up and running in a day. Daniel and Geert-Jan flew over from the NCC. When they got to London City Airport, they got on a black cab, and the root servers were taken to Telehouse East and connected to the Links, and we had them up and running. The other root operation that I was notionally responsible for, at least on the org chart, was froot. After Links and Nominet, I spent a few years doing stuff which is covered in another presentation I've done. I knew Paul from the anti-spam campaign days, this was the time that I moved to the US. And ISC was operating more root name server instances than anybody because they'd pioneered Anycast, and this was despite them having less money than just any other root operator. And one of the things that we did at ISC is we ate our own dog food. You know, the code that we wrote is what we ran on the systems. All these froot instances ran by 9. And there was a week when everyone more responsible in the organization was away than me was away, and we had a vulnerability which was potentially a 0-day, and yeah, we had to patch that. We had to roll it all out to production. Amazing team of smart people just made it happen. But yeah, you know, bind 10 is also the thing that we never mention, so I won't mention it. The rationale for OARC. By the mid-80s, it was very clear that DNS is a special place when it comes to security in terms of being attacked, in terms of measuring issues, in terms of fixing them. There was the summer of fear in 2008 with the potential cache poisoning issues. DNSSEC was supposed to be the solution to problems like that, but actually deployment was proving a lot harder than expected. And really, what Paul identified was that many of the DNS security issues were actually needing better cooperation and telemetry, data sharing, and we needed a home for that, but that home needed to be an independent, neutral organization. It couldn't even be ISC because they were a vendor with an operator with skin in the game. So this is how we've built internet exchanges. Maybe we can apply internet exchange-like neutrality and membership models to solving some of this problem. OARC started in 2004. I didn't get involved until a couple of years later. OARC was founded with National Science Foundation money and a grant to CADA at University of California, San Diego, who in turn funded ISC to build the data store, and I know the guy that built it is in this room, which would support the day in the life of the internet data collections, which Fujiwara-san presented about earlier. OARC was also a kind of experimental test bed for telemetry sharing and collaboration tools and projects that nobody could quite figure out what else to do with. But it gradually moved forward. We incorporated it as a 501c3 nonprofit in 2008, set up a board, there was a period of 6 years where I was involved in that, several other people involved in both OARC and ISC. We made some headway, but it was also kind of complicated. 2012, there was a bunch of leadership turmoil at ISC, and I left at that point, and the best opportunity was to build an OARC dedicated team. Here we are 22 years after OARC was set up. I think one of the things that's important to understand is, unlike internet exchanges or name or number registries, we're not providing a service that is essential to everyone's business. We have to continuously, OARC has to continuously re-demonstrate its value and its relevance. And the fact that it's still here and thriving as an organization 22 years after it was founded, I think that means that is, and it has been and is being achieved. And I think you're a great community, smart, respectful. It's been really good to be involved and to work with you all. And again, as we just saw in Peter's presentation, every few years something horrible happens to the DNS, and the OARC community comes together and is instrumental in fixing it. I mean, there wasn't just DENIC last week, there was also Slack a few years ago. And if I looked in the archives, I can remember there have been various other instances as well. I think, something that it's important is that OARC is a place where operators and researchers communicate and collaborate. All this technology that we deploy is here because of science, and I think it's important to remember, the scientific method is an integral part of engineering. So I think the DNS is mostly a success. The principles that were founded was in the original vision of what the internet should be, which feels a bit like a distant memory in some places now. But I think there are a whole bunch of attributes about the DNS that mostly work well. But like anything that spreads over everything, it's a bit of a success disaster as well. That's another Paul Vixie term. But, and I think also it's like, the usual problem explaining to your auntie what you do for a day job. People see domain names less and less now. They're interacting with apps and social media, but the DNS is still there. It's kind of more like an abstraction layer in the distributed system that is the internet now. But it's a very important and essential abstraction layer. And yeah, sure, there have been many competing namespace proposals, but it always seems to be that the DNS is the one that keeps plodding along. So, some observations on the past 4 decades of trying to avoid being involved in the DNS. I am not a DNS expert, I just happen to know a lot of you. And even if you look back at the historical alternative namespaces, managing the namespace is not just about the protocol. There's a whole bunch of other issues that go with that as well. And I mean, I think one of the things that struck me is that the vision of the DNS in the early days was very much about the hierarchy of academic departments. And the world is a little bit different since then. But, please God, let's not flatten the route out with yet more GTLDs. I'm sorry, I just don't see what value they add. It's also pretty clear that DNSSEC has become, you know, the tail that's wagging the dog. It's become an industry within an industry. Perhaps with hindsight, maybe we should have tackled some easier DNS security problems first, but that's maybe a controversial thought. I think that, you know, one of the strengths of the internet and DNS during the 90s, you know, back in the days when it all just worked and it was part of the solution, is that we were much more simple in the technology choices than the prevailing ITU telco carrier wisdom. And I'm sorry, that's just no longer the case. You know, and with apologies to Nessie, I think we may have created a monster rather than a camel. But I think that, you know, one of the things that was part of the original vision for OARC is that the DNS is a target for attacks and abuse, but it also means it's a great place to detect these attacks, to measure them, to prevent them, to mitigate them. Get the operators to get the data, get that data to the researchers who have the brain cells to analyze it all, get it back to the developers who will actually fix it. And you know, I think of that as internet science, which is not the same thing as internet engineering, but I think that you know, we need internet science just as much as we need climate science. It's really important to understand this complicated thing that we have created and that is so much part of our everyday lives. So that's basically what I have to say. I hope that was interesting. If you want more old fart ramblings, I'm trying to sort of get a few other stories out there while my brain cells still retain them. There's some of the other presentations. I'll be doing another one in London in July. There's a few more in my head. And that's pretty much it. I mean, you know, there are various resources where you can find out more about what I'm doing with my time these days. Also, I've added a couple of slides which are hopefully are useful career advice, but I'm not going to run through them right now. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being a great place to work for the past couple of decades. I'll be happy to take any questions, although I reserve the right to answer some of them only over a beer. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Keith? Does anyone dare to ask any questions? Okay, I'm going to ask the really difficult question. How many more years do you think that DNS will continue to be important?
I don't know, as long as IPv4 remains relevant. Not because of any connection between the two, but just because they both refuse to die. Okay, thank you all.